So I want to begin with an introduction, but first and foremost, with a thank you to Nancy L. Thomas, who's been a friend to us here in Worcester, and at Worcester State in particular. And she's been so generous with her time and expertise on many occasions, and we're really grateful for that. Her professional accomplishments are many, but in particular, she directs the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education at Tufts University's Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life. IDHE, as it's known, is an applied research center that studies higher education's role in American democracy and supports college and university student political learning and participation. The Institute's signature initiative, which I am a huge fan of, by the way, is the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, which examines student voting rates, patterns, and conditions at nearly 1,200 US colleges and universities. She holds a doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a law degree from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. She is also an associate editor of the Journal of Public Deliberation, a senior associate with Everyday Democracy, and a member of the Scholar Strategy Network. Today's discussion will be, not surprisingly, democratic, and we hope that members on the call will participate in a Jamboard as we consider a most timely issue, the threats to American democracy and the role higher education can play in addressing and alleviating those threats. With that, welcome, Nancy Thomas.
Well, thank you, Mark. That's very nice. A nice introduction. I'm so happy to be here and frankly, happy to be back, although I wish I were there in person. I love my trips to Worcester and my multi-campus visits, and I'm hoping we can all resume them pretty darn soon. I would like to start with a couple of things. One is to my Brady Bunch right is Yui Trin. She is, if any of you are involved in the voting study, then you know Yui, because she's the one who sends you everything. She's the one who responds to all of your questions. And she's the one who single-handedly manages 1,200 colleges and universities across the US. So I love bringing Yui to these things because she's always insightful and can always answer questions about NSOLV, which we will create room to do if that comes up. She's also going to be handling the Jamboard. I do also want to bring up just one small housekeeping matter, and that is that we are going to have a discussion. And that's because we're a small group, and we can do that. We are, however, recording, and I want to give anybody the right to veto recording because I would rather have a robust and candid conversation than not. And the other option is for you, if you want to say something and you're worried about it being recorded, to say, could we please turn off the recorder for a minute? Okay, so either of those options is fine with me. If you want to not have any recording at all, let Janine know. Janine, can you wave so that they can see you? And then if you want to turn off the recording at any time, just say, can we please shut this off? And there's a reason for that. And that is that our democracy is under siege right now. I am sure you've noticed. And that's what we're going to talk about. But one of the reasons it's particularly problematic for colleges and universities is that what I'm hearing anyway is that faculty are afraid of being recorded. You know, they're afraid of the context for their remarks being taken out of place and blasted. I will tell you that 15 years ago, I spent one glorious day on the list of 100 most dangerous academics in the United States when such a list was being maintained. And it really, I had not done anything other than advocate for, believe it or not, neutral spaces to talk about some controversial topics. And for that, I was put on a watch list. I was quickly removed from the watch list, but it started a while ago. So some of the challenges that we're facing are not new. I think the question is, are they worse? Are they getting better? And what are we going to be able to do with it? So with that, we're going to move into some Q&A, and we're going to use a Jamboard. And so I'm going to turn it over to Yui to explain what Jamboard is and how to use it. And then we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. So I just posted a link in the chat box that you should be able to access. So if you click on that, and I will share my screen and give you a little pointers if you have not used it before.
Yui, if I want to see people and use the Jamboard, can I cut my screens in half and put them next to each other? Something like that?
Yes, you should be able to do it.
Okay, great.
So if you, Nancy, if you make your screen like smaller, the view will change and you can see it. So we'll start off with this one right here. So currently we have 4 on here. So if you will navigate to the next ones in a little bit, but that's how you navigate to different ones. So on your left-hand side, what functions we want you to use is to post a sticky note, which is the 4th one down on the left-hand side control panel. So if you click on it and just start typing, and then you can change the color here and just click save, and your note will show on the screen, and you can move it anywhere you want. And if you like to delete it, just click on the upper right hand corner, just those 3 little dots. It will allow you to delete or duplicate or edit. You can add shapes and stuff too, but I think the sticky notes is the function that we want to focus on for now. So I'll let you guys have at it, and if you have any questions, I think we're a small group now, so just raise your hands, or you can type in the chat if you would like to not raise your hand.
Thanks, Yui. So some of you have actually started, which is very cool. The question on the table is, what are you viewing as the most significant challenges facing US democracy right now? And if I were practicing law, somebody might say, well, that's a leading question. Maybe we're not facing any challenges. I'm going to assume that you think we're facing some challenges. I'm not going to assume, however, that your perspective is from one political party to the other, or one side of the political spectrum. And so it would be interesting not only to say what you view as the most significant challenges facing democracy, but perhaps what you think somebody not in the room might say. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to fill this out, and then we'll see what we've got. And for those of you who are just joining us, take a Post-it note, 4th down on the left, and answer the question, what do you view as the most significant challenges facing democracy right now? Could we move that Post-it note down, the one that's over the question? Thank you. Thanks, Janine. I think somebody just tried to draw a little heart around one. All right, so here are a few things that I'm seeing, and I want to open it up a little bit. And I think that there are ways, these little symbols are ways to put a pin in something. So if you see something and you agree with it, try to signal that on there. I think, so for example, we've got misinformation, and kind of near it, and I think appropriately so, is a lack of education. I think this means somebody is emphatically reinforcing misinformation. Partisanship, a lack of civic participation, polarization, assuming ill intent of others. Scarcity mindset. This is interesting, believing there is not enough for everybody. This kind of zero-sum game that I agree we are facing. A tendency for people to be easily offended and aggrieved. A lack of face-to-face dialogue about difficult topics. Lack of manners and decency. Boy, have I heard the word decency a lot in the last, I don't know, 4 years, I'd say. In dialogue occurring on social media. That's kind of two different things, the lack of decency and the lack of decency in social media. But I definitely see the connection between them. Economic inequality, increased barriers to voting, insufficient representation of the diverse needs and voices in our country. These are amazing. These are great. Gerrymandering. Women's rights under attack. Yeah. Keep going. I think people are just warming up, and I think that's great. Voter ID laws. Yeah, we could put the increased barriers to voting, voter ID laws, and gerrymandering kind of near each other. Yeah. Money in politics. Whew. That's a big one to tackle, isn't it? Fear of speaking openly about one's opinions. So I'm rambling as I'm reading, but I'm wondering if anybody would like to say a little bit more about what they posted or what you're seeing here. I'm going to open it up a little bit. And just go ahead. I don't want to call on people. Just go ahead and speak out. If it becomes cumbersome, we'll do it a different way.
I posted the misinformation, and I think that some of that comes from certain news entities, some underground news entities. I think conspiracy theories are established, and they're always rooted somehow in something that's true, which makes it believable to those who maybe are not educated on the issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on what they're seeing? Would anybody like
the note I put up a couple of notes, Nancy. One is the lack of participation. You know, the NSAL study has allowed us to focus on voting rates, registration and voting rates, which I think is really just a great project that you're running. But it also leads to the discussion of, there's a lot of key boards that are undersubscribed. There's a lot of, local, what used to be filled at town hall meetings and whatnot. And I think that we've lost the urge. Maybe it's the structure of our lives. Maybe it's the structure of our economic lives and inequality. but we have far less participation than we need to solve the problems that we face.
Mhm. It's an interesting point, Mark. In other words, it's is it a lack of participation or a lack of opportunities to participate?
I would say that there's plenty of opportunities. Someone in my role, running a Center for Civic Engagement, I get pulled in all kinds of directions by different opportunities. The one thing I've focused on recently, I've been reading a book now about this, is that, we're taught, whether it's the technology of communication, digital technology, social media, this ties into misinformation. We're taught that the experts will come in and solve problems for us, right? And this is pointed out by a number of people that, we think the experts will come in and solve our issues, but we really need to be, all of us, whether we're expert in a field or not, participating in how we address the issues we face. There's many, many examples of this, right? For example, one example I've been writing about recently is, if you remember, the red delicious apples used to be a great apple out in Washington State. The experts came in and said they were going to breed one that they could ship more readily, right? And so that whole market collapsed, because of experting. And one of the things I stress to students is not to be intimidated by a lack of training or lack of expertise. We need all the voices. We need all the voices participating, no matter what your status is in a society. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Before I give my thoughts, I wonder if anybody else has any they want to share.
I would love to respond to that. I think a lot of the conversation around participation and the idea of declining participation, or I think it does come down frequently to opportunities. I think when we look at the opportunities that we have to participate, we have to consider how accessible are they really? Is there childcare? Do you get time off from work to go? And I think frequently a lot of the problems that are driving our democracy is not a lack of participation, but an unequitable distribution of opportunities to participate. The people who have the most time, energy, and money are also the people who are already the best represented and are the least vulnerable. And I think frequently we are hearing from the same voices over and over, and that skews our perception of what our communities really need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I served on a committee to try and increase diversity among our faculty, and the number one recommendation, Victoria, by a very large study from Harvard Public Health was childcare. That's the way to increase diversity. So that's a really excellent point, Victoria. Thank you.
Other comments on this board? Anybody want to propose one that may be missing from the board? Perhaps not because it's your perspective, but because it's a perspective missing from this group.
I have one that I didn't put on the board, kind of because it's hard to put into words, but I see, especially with the pandemic, like a general kind of boredom and lack of isolation that leaves people to look for something to connect to. And unfortunately, I think sometimes that is more extremist groups or conspiracy theories or things that, like, I don't know, get people's adrenaline going in a way that they feel a little less bored. So something about kind of the lack of community that people are generally feeling I feel like making people seek out community online in places that aren't particularly healthy.
I think that's an excellent point. Heather puts in white supremacy and racism. To add it to the board, I would put both of those thoughts on the board And also the comment about inequitable access to opportunities to participate. I think all of those are great additions to the board. So this is a good exercise and a good exercise for you all to do. It's a tricky one though, because it's hard to categorize these and it's hard to wrap your head around, well, okay, so what do we do with all of them? We have done some writing and some organizing of what does it mean to have a healthy democracy? What does a strong democracy look like? And I have identified 4 attributes of a strong democracy that I'll share with you. The first one is that it is participatory. And it is both that people do participate and that they have access to opportunities to participate. And that the access to opportunities are equal access. The second attribute of a strong democracy is that it values equality that ends up being translating into equity. So it's one thing to give equal access to people. It's another thing to have equitable outcomes. And so when we talk about the ability to participate, is there an equal opportunity to participate, and are there equitable outcomes? In other words, does that participation result in fair opportunities? The third thing is that a healthy democracy is educated and it's informed. And this then captures this thought about, a lack of education or misinformation. And then the final attribute of a healthy democracy is that it is justly governed. So this is something that I have been critical of the civic engagement movement in higher education, is that it has historically focused on a very narrow forms of participation. Let's do volunteerism, let's do service. More recently, let's do some community-based research. I think that one's a great addition. And even more recently than that, let's advocate for voting. Voting was not on higher ed's radar at all before 2016, and that has changed a lot. And so participation has been a very narrowly defined by the academy, and it hasn't resulted in equitable outcomes. So racial inequality and wealth inequality are at highs that are the highest they've been in 100 years. And that is a very frightening statistic, because then it gets into this issue of, well, if I can't put food on the table, how am I going to find time to go participate in a deliberative dialogue that solves problems in my community? I also think that a lot of the problems under these 4 attributes, some of the things that you have identified, have become they're increasing exponentially. And so somebody mentioned in the chat white supremacy and extremism. Well, our political polarization has literally given way to that. We have become so polarized that it leaves a lot of room for alternatives. And white nationalism, hate groups, anti-women groups, groups that stormed the Capitol on January 6th. These are organizations and people who have been able to flourish because of polarization. And I also believe that we have government officials on both sides of the political aisle, but I'm not going to lie, I think it is more on the Republican side right now. That isn't historically always the case, but that polarization has become a political wedge. It has become a political opportunity and a tool for maintaining power, in the same way that voter suppression, increasing barriers to voting, really restrictive voter ID laws, and gerrymandering have become. So I think that all of these things are spot on. I am kind of curious about the two-party system, but I think that's a whole other webinar. But I am wondering, you know, if we did get rid of it, what would we replace it with? Any comments or thoughts on what I just said?
Recording in progress.
Yeah, I'll comment on that, Nancy. I encourage others to want to be a dominant voice in this, because Nancy and I have worked together on a couple of other projects, and I'm going to be, you know, cheerleading for Nancy's point of view. So, but I think one of the things is, so for example, if you take the phenomena of Donald Trump, you know, there's now this, you know, kind of counter narrative that it's the hatred of Trump that's keeping us from moving forward, right? And so how do we, if we're polarized, Nancy, so dramatically, how do we reach across that aisle where, you know, recently there was, I don't know if you read the news as much as I do, but recently there was an encounter between two quote unquote influencers, Larry David and Dershowitz from Harvard. And they bumped into each other at a convenience store. And Larry David just said, "This is disgusting. I can't even talk to you." And Dershowitz, who had supported Trump and Pompeo, said, "We can talk," right? So Nancy, or anyone, I don't know if anyone wants to comment. How do we reach across to a position that we see as extreme and try to repair the chasm, you know, between us?
So I'm so glad you asked that question, Mark. And what I'd like to do is put a pin in it, because I want to ask the corollary question, which is, should we? You know, so do I need to sit at the table with the Proud Boys? They're an anti-women group. They don't want me to have rights. So I think that the question is, it's one coin, two sides. One is, how do we talk to people that we disagree with, even violently or vehemently? And second of all, do we have to? So I want to come back to those two questions, because I think they are, in the end, the right questions. I want to go into the next exercise. And so what you're going to do is, at the top of your page, you're going to flip to the next two boards. And there are two of them, one for faculty and staff, and the third one is for students. So go to the board that applies to you the most. And this is going to be really fast, like 90 seconds. So if you were to teach these threats, if you were to try to address these threats, what challenges would you face in doing that? So go to the board that most applies to you and talk about the threats. If you're a student, what are your challenges in being an activist in addressing these threats? I love this, answering the question of who's worth trying to educate. Wow. Mm. Who wrote always in choir practice? What does that mean?
That was me. The only people who come to trainings or teaching around these challenges are the people who are already kind of fighting the good fight. And it's hard to get the folks who are resistant to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I hear you.
And how do we change the culture if we don't have a wide enough group of people? I don't know. So I guess it's really all about building the choir. How do we bring more people in, or
Mm-hmm. Yep.
find the right
Well,
concert halls?
yeah, that's really, really good. Yeah. If you are an educator, flip to the student board real quickly and read those two things. They're both really important as educators to know that that's what's on the minds of students. Dealing with burnout, the imposter syndrome, trying to put food on the table. Yeah. Yep. Thank you for putting the hearts around those. So as you can imagine, these threats, how do you teach this way? How do you get at these issues? This idea of always preaching to the choir, getting people to come to the room. I've heard these for years, and they are all very real and difficult problems to tackle. I'm going to try to tackle actually a couple of them. Actually, that's not true. I'm going to let you. Would anybody like to tackle any of these problems? Anything that you've done that has that let you succeed in breaking down some of these challenges? Okay, let me start with the choir and getting people to come, for example, to this session. My experience is the campuses are a third, a third, a third. There's a third that you're just never going to reach. And they're not going to come to things like this, and their attitude is going to be talk to the hand. And I would not bother with them. I would not. I think there's also the third that is the choir, and they get it, and they're reliable, and they will always come, and they get it. And that somewhere there is that middle third. Now, if you're on some campuses, it doesn't come out to a third, a third, a third. It comes out to 40, 20, 40, or it comes out to 10, 50, something else. You know better than I do whether people are more in one camp or the other. But what I would be doing is trying to identify that middle group and working to get them to come. Now, how do you get people to come to a room for something like this? I think that it often boils down to, is it convenient? Do you have childcare? Is it a safe space? And do they think they're going to get something out of it? Do they think they're going to get some tips that they can actually apply? Is it going to be a worthwhile session? People are busy. Nobody has time. And so getting people there, you have to really dangle some concrete outcomes. The other thing to know are that my 2 rules about collaboration, and that's really what you're talking about, is you want to find collaborators, you want to find co-conspirators, you want to find people who might join the choir. And there are really only 2 reasons why people collaborate. One is they collaborate because of the collaboration, they are able to do their job or something else, their task, better. And the other reason is, but for the collaboration, they can't do their job. Okay, so I'm going to say those again. One is they can, because of the collaboration, they're going to do better. And the other one is without the collaboration, they can't do it. All right, so a lot of faculty members are trained to be Lone Rangers. I mean, that's the gig. That's what we all do. We write on our own, we publish on our own, and there's not a lot of incentivizing to collaborate. So what you have to do is you have to figure out, how do we incentivize collaboration? How do we get people to want to work together? Obviously, small stipends are one of my favorites, but that's not easy to do, particularly at low resource institutions. So then it becomes a matter of, is this a good space? I often find that if they can come once, they will come back, because they'll realize what a good opportunity is for them. But when you design opportunities to get people to come, be thinking about what they're going to walk away with, and make sure that you communicate that with them. I don't know that I can tackle the access to data problem. I know that for us, we provided the voting rates because higher education lacks a concrete measure of civic engagement. And while voting is not the only measure of civic engagement, it is pretty concrete. And it's telling, it's a revealing measure. So I think getting access to data does make it hard to set goalposts. And for that, there are assessment experts out there. There's some really good books on assessment, and maybe that's a working community that somebody wants to put together and says, how do we assess, our learning experiences for students? This bit about having my words picked apart and taken out of context and labeling me and disregard by those who disagree. This is huge. This is a huge problem. And I know people who are getting out of the teaching profession because this has gotten so big. So there, I think it goes back to something that was said earlier about the lack of community, the loss of community, partly due to the pandemic. And I think that's absolutely right. The community, our sense of community has been lost because of the pandemic. But I also think that I'm not sure we ever had it as well as, I think we're a little nostalgic for something we may not have had. So anything you can do to build social cohesion, to build community on your campus, is something that will lead to more trust. And trust is what is absolutely essential to start breaking down polarization, start tackling extremism. I hear a lot about fear from professors on college and university campuses these days. And the best I can say is find other people who are fearful and start figuring out how, as a community. Now, if you don't feel that you have the back of your administration, talk to Mark or at least start talking about it. Your administration should have your back. There should be a clear understanding of what academic freedom is and how it will be applied on your campus. And I find it to be one of the most fruitful conversations a campus can have, at least the academics, and also one of the least prevalent. I don't hear about a lot of talks about academic freedom. Recently, there has been an uptick as legislators are passing legislation saying you can't teach what has been labeled critical race theory. I don't think that's what they mean when they put it in an act in legislation. But New Hampshire is talking about what's called a divisive concepts law, that you can't teach divisive concepts. Can you imagine our jobs if we can't teach? I don't know what else we do. So the idea that we are supposed to be so neutral and not taking sides on anything, that we can't talk about any of it, is crazy. And that is a matter of academic freedom. I will put in my 2 cents worth on academic freedom. I think it has been co-opted by groups, and it is being treated as I have a right to do my own syllabus and to not teach on Fridays. That is not what academic freedom is. Academic freedom is a social contract between your institution and the American public, that you have a duty and a responsibility to educate for democracy, to educate for society. And in exchange for living up to that responsibility, you will be protected. Okay, so academic freedom is a social contract between higher education and society. And so people who say we have academic freedom and yet they're not educating for the betterment of society, then they are not living up to that responsibility. I know that is in some circles a very controversial thing to say, and particularly among the circles of people who don't want us to do civic education, who don't want us to educate for democracy, who think that civics is a form of liberal indoctrination. They're the ones who are pushing back against academic freedom. I'm going to pause for a minute and just see if there are any questions on anything I've just said, or comments or pushback. I welcome all of it.
Yeah, not a question, but what I say in class is that academic freedom also applies to the students, right? So in other words, a classroom is a laboratory, not a neutral space, it's a laboratory, and that anything can be said if it's in the interest of learning, right? So in other words, I feel like students need to be empowered with that contract that you're talking about, not only faculty, that it applies to the whole community, so that students need to be taught to feel free to speak, and address the concerns that they have, if it's in the interest of, in the pursuit of education.
Mm. Thoughts on that? Thoughts from our students on that? Jordan, do you have your hand up?
I do. It's not in reaction to your comment, Mark. Sorry, it was a thought previous. But I'm wondering if there already is, or there can be, or should be any role for the accrediting bodies in relation to, facilitating academic freedom. And I don't know, I'm a staff person who hasn't had to deal with accrediting, reaccrediting issues or anything like that at any point, so.
Yeah. My experience with accrediting entities is that they are pretty narrowly focused on some criteria, and that this isn't a piece of it, but it should be. I think it absolutely should be. I think we need a national push for academic freedom. So I agree. Yeah. I want to see it. Garland just put up, unfortunately, hang on, I lost that chat. Unfortunately, I don't feel that students will often feel the comfort or safety to be open. So that's such a good point, Garland. And I think it goes back to Mark's point, which is, well, I'm encouraging my students to exercise their rights to free speech in my classroom. I encourage that. But to the earlier point about social cohesion and trust, and I can't trust people, I'm going to be taken out of context. Trust building is not automatic. You cannot assume trust. Your students will not trust you automatically as faculty members. And it goes the other way too. I saw a tweet the other day, a woman tweeted out, she's from a Southern university that has a no mask mandate by the governor and not on her campus. And so there's sort of a fist fight going on around that. And she said to her 35 students before class started, I am pregnant. I cannot get COVID. I am pleading with all of you, please wear a mask. And she said 4 of her 35 students showed up with a mask. Okay, that is going to be a tough classroom for trust building. That is going to be super hard. So, yeah, Netflix, the chair. Yeah, information taken out of context. Right. I haven't watched The Chair. I'm waiting so I can binge it. I don't want suspense in my life. I want to come back to the two things. One thing that Mark said about free speech for students. I don't know that they have it. Actually, they don't have a constitutional right to it in the classroom. And I don't even think they necessarily have some kind of contractual right unless there are policies on your campus, which means that when you are saying to students, I encourage you to speak freely, you are creating a new set of norms for your classroom, which is perfectly appropriate because you have the academic freedom to do that. But if it goes against the culture of the campus or is unusual to the students, that you're going to have to do some trust building to make it stick. And then I also wanted to go back to the point that you made earlier, which was how do we reach out and talk to people who disagree with us? And in some cases vehemently. And my response too, which is, how do we have to do that? And so I don't actually have great answers for that. I'm wondering whether anybody has any thoughts, and I want to bring us to a close pretty soon. I welcome thoughts either in the chat or speak up.
Well, my comment came from just the simple fact that we need to stay engaged, right? We need to stay engaged with, and particularly if people that we disagree with are in positions of power, right? I mean, I remember a conversation with a Black man who, I asked him about it, and I said, how do you do that? How do you talk with a racist, for example? He's been told, F you to his face for being simply for being Black, right? And he said to me, you have to stay engaged. And I thought that was a really courageous thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean I'm going to sit down with the Proud Boys? No, not anytime soon. I'm not going to sit down with someone who's armed, for example, but, just that's always in my mind, stay engaged. Darnell said to me, stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not a formula for success in that, but I think it's a necessity.
I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer on this, Mark. I think it's so situational, but I absolutely agree that we should do whatever we can to get engaged. But then I go back to this maybe there are some people that it's just too hard. It's too hard. All right, so we are pretty close to out of time. I hope that throughout this, I've offered you a few little tips. How do we get people to come if you build it? The need to, yeah, Garland's point, not every person needs to listen to every person at all times, right? I think we have to respect people where they're at. I think, you know, we need to try to empathize and not expect someone to come to every event at all times. But on the other hand, I also agree with Mark. If we don't start breaking down polarization, we are simply giving way to more extremism and more hatred and the bad things that come along with that, this lack of decency that we're seeing everywhere. When you try to get people in the room, try to carve out spaces for them to be talking about things that they value or need, something that will be good for them, talking about issues that are important to them. Maybe you could get them together on a lack of access to data, for example, or lack of resources. Get people together to problem solve, and that might help. To the students, you know, the dealing with burnout or the imposter syndrome, you know, in fact, for both of these, trying to put food on the table, you need support systems, and you need faculty and staff who are flexible enough to work with you when you are feeling burned out, when you are feeling like you aren't quite confident in where you're standing, or when you simply can't do something because you have to put food on the table. And I think these two comments are a great wake up to the educators on the call. But again, to the point that I think a number of people have made so far, maybe the ones on this call are not the ones who need to see that message. So how are you going to reach the others? Try to chip away at the third, and to make that group of untouchables a smaller group, and find all sorts of ways to build community and trust. Those are my pieces of wisdom. We have done a lot of writing on this and are going to continue to do more. You can always reach out to me. I'm available and accessible. And I think with that, I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. You know, my wife has pointed out to me many times, I'm very bad at introducing myself, but I also want to introduce Janine Wendt, who's the executive director of HECMA, who organized today. And HECMA represents the consortium in Worcester. I should have done that at the start, but thank you, Janine, for organizing us today.
Thank you, Mark, for
just,
emceeing.
you know, triple thanks to Nancy. And I sent a note to Dewey. If we can save those Jamboards, I'd love to share those with this group, because I think there's really a lot of interesting points there for us to reflect on. So thank you so much, Nancy, again, and to everyone on the call. We certainly have some work to do, and I think today has created a little network that we can share resources through.
Good luck, everybody. Stay democratic, stay cool.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Yui. We so appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks, Janine and Mark.